So, welcome to this next session where we talk about a very urgent and hot topic about mobility and transport and how we can revolutionize the sector of mobility and transport. I'm Insa Schniedermeyer. I'm a journalist and a communication strategist. I think that's not an applause for me. And I'll be your host for the next 1 hour 15. Let me start with one number. 25%, or 1/4. That is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that is in the EU today, totally emitted only by transport. And not only that, transport also causes air pollution, noise pollution, and habitat fragmentation. So it's fair to say that the transport sector today has a huge negative impact, not only on the environment, but also on human health. This shows the shift away from fossil fuels in transport is crucial, not just for reducing emissions, but for building a sustainable future that benefits people, the planet, and the economy. This transformation in transport and mobility requires bold leadership and big ideas. That's where we start today, also at Change Now and with this keynote and panel. I'm very pleased and excited to introduce you to our first keynote speaker, Stientje Van Veldhoven. She's the Vice President and Regional Director for Europe at the World Resources Institute. Stientje has played a key role in shaping European climate, energy and sustainable policy, including as Minister of Environment and Housing in the Netherlands. Please join me in welcoming her on stage. Welcome, Stientje.
So, let me see if this works. Yes, it does. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being so energetic at the end of this full day with lots of conferences, but what a pleasure to be here. And thank you also so much for Change Now, for inviting me to speak about transport and about the end to fossil fuels. It's a topic that, as was mentioned, I was responsible for in my previous role. And for the World Resources Institute, it is also one of the key shifts that we need to make for people, climate and nature, because we really need to look at those three elements at the same time. And for those of you that may be less familiar with the work of the World Resources Institute, we are a global research organization that is working to improve people's lives across the world, protect nature and halt climate change. But today our focus is on transport and cities. Why, you may wonder? Actually, because, to put it very simply, the world is moving to town. Already today, more than half of the world's population lives in cities. And actually, in the next 30 years, that will become 70%. So actually, this means that cities will define transport. And cities and transport, well, let's say, it has always been a bit of a love and hate relationship. In 1894, London was literally drowning in horse manure. With 50,000 horses on the streets, the city faced as much as 1,000 tons of manure every day. And this, of course, led to all kinds of nuisance and public health problems, and the Times newspaper called it the unsolvable crisis, because you cannot make horses stop eating. Yeah, we all know we traded horsepower for cars, revolutionizing urban life, but also trading our manure problem for carbon, exhaust fumes, and road unsafety. Now, this is Utrecht. It's the town where I was born in the Netherlands. And by the time that I was born, this is what it looked like on the left side. It's a bit later than when I was born, to be honest, but just about around that time. Because my colleagues are here in the room, right? They will know how to check me. But the picture on the right side is about the time that I left Dutch politics and joined the World Resources Institute. And if you look carefully, you look at those two towers, you can see it's actually the same place. It had changed completely once more. So mobility transformation, even though it may always seem so impossible, it may seem such a large endeavor, is actually of all times. And not just because we find better, faster vehicles, but also because what we value changes. Many people believe that the Netherlands were born as a cycling country. And this again is one of those myths. Many inner city squares were actually car parks. The very square before the parliament where I worked for 7 years, which is now a beautiful place with lots of terraces, etc. I don't know if you've been to The Hague, you'll know the Plein. But that was just an open space car park. But actually, Dutch moms went to the streets to protect their kids against the cars that killed them. That is what made the Netherlands a cycling country. And the recent changes to my birth town have a lot to do with ensuring a livable and resilient city in the face of a growing population, air pollution, and climate change. All this to illustrate a very simple truth. Transport's actually not about how we move. It is actually about how we live. Because transport is how we get to our jobs, to our schools, how we visit our family, our loved ones, how we get to goods and services. Transport is actually the, well, more visible, but actually also partly invisible social infrastructure of opportunity, and literally opens the way to use those opportunities. And these days, those opportunities actually go beyond access to jobs, schools, and friends. Because changing our transport now also means more energy independence. In the face of geopolitical turmoil, the end to fossil fuels has got a very different ring to it. It means more economic stability in the face of fluctuating oil prices. And in the face of public health, as toxic fumes and global warming turn transport, as it currently have it, into literally a suffocating blanket. And we all know it, transport accounts for over 20% of all global emissions. So if you just continue down the current path, that will double in 10 years. In 10 years, that emission will double because the world population is growing so fast and transport is growing so fast. As if we just do what we did, we won't only get what we got, it will get worse. But I'm an optimist, so let me phrase it differently. It's a massive opportunity. It is an opportunity that leverages electric vehicles, public transport, river and rail systems, clean freight, urban innovation. And yes, for that, we need to leverage the power of working together. So my main message to you here is, it really is not just about decarbonizing transport or the end of fossil fuels. It really is rethinking transport. That is a challenge that we face. And that question is most pressing in cities. We must start in the place where the problem and the potential is greatest. Like I said, today about half the world's population lives in cities and about 2.5 billion more people will live there. And that means like 1 billion new vehicles will get on the road unless we change things. And you know, you all know it. Once you've set your own mobility pattern, after that it's harder to change. So when you've bought that car, you're going to use it for a certain while. That just not means more people in cities. It means more congestion, more emissions, and a growing pressure on already very, very stressed and aging infrastructure. It's a question also of equity and equality. Air pollution killed over 350 people in the European Union in 2022. I come from a research organization, so you're going to get a couple of numbers in this presentation, but not too many. But a person's risk actually depends largely on where you live. Most of the deaths from exposure to fine particulate matter coming from dust, smoke, and exhaust actually harm the most poor and vulnerable quarters of our cities. And climate change and health impacts through heat also are obvious in cities. And in fact, in 2023, heat-related deaths in Europe amounted to nearly 50,000. And that number is expected to rise by 50% in 2050 if we leave climate change unabated. Heat is a major new problem, especially for European cities. They are not built to resist heat. They are usually built, especially in the northwestern part, to keep the heat in. But we are starting to face a very different problem. In cities, high temperatures are exacerbated by a large amount of traffic exhaust. Those two really form this combination of a toxic blanket. And this is worse in neighborhoods with poor infrastructures and very few green spaces. Just as in the past, urban planning has contributed to extreme heat in some areas, future choices can create cooler and more livable cities. Natural elements like tree shade, for example, can help to lower temperatures by 3 to 4 degrees. So while a tree makes a street look nice, it makes actually the living a lot nicer in that space. But of course, that space has to literally be carved out of the space that is currently taken up, and often is taken up by our current modes of transportation. On the other hand, high urban density, if designed correctly, also provides the perfect business case for solutions that can provide accessible, fast, comfortable public transport, right, if we choose to invest in it. The designation of clearly demarcated fossil fuel-free transport zone and corridors can also help to create certainty for those that have to invest. This is one of the things that I worked on when I was minister in the Netherlands, was to create this with the cities. They couldn't have done it without me. I could never have done it without them. We need to cooperate. And even in the face of changing geopolitical expectations, our expectation at the World Resources Institute is that decarbonization will continue. We are reaching tipping points in our overall transition. And as Mary Robinson said this morning, we know that the challenge is daunting. We know that it's now maybe more daunting than ever. But we need to celebrate also the successes that we've had. We can create change. And to give you a few examples, as of 2023, there were about 630 million electric buses in operation globally, and the vast majority in China. Looking ahead, the International Energy Agency projects that that number could reach 2.7 million electric buses by 2030. 2.7 billion, that is. And in the European Union, battery-supported vehicles reached about half of new purchases in 2024. So, of course, we have a legacy stock. But if we start by adding at least half of what we buy with electric, then we're starting to see massive change. To be honest, it's not easy everywhere. For electric trucks, for example, it's harder. I'm sure you're going to hear more about this from other speakers. By 2022, about 96% of all trucks in Europe still ran on diesel. So we have a major way to go. And the electric truck market in Europe, though, is on the rise, with a projected growth rate of also 50% annually. And I'm sure you all know this fable of the chess drawing board, right? When you get one and then you double and then you double, then you really start to make big changes. But of course, scaling electric freight is not just about the vehicles. It's very much also about the enabling infrastructure. It's about charging stations, maintenance hubs, battery supply chains, and of course it's about access to finance, especially for medium and small enterprises. We need to help them to make the transition, and stability and a clear course for Europe is the best way to actually get that. I think that is one of the things that Europe has, which really are one of its strongholds, is that stability, of course, that we've had in driving this transition over time. In India, because we're not just looking at Europe, of course, at the World Resources Institute. So I want to give you a few examples also what's happening across the world. In India, partners launched pilot corridors to support e-freight, focusing investment where the business case was strongest. So don't try to electrify everywhere at the same time. Find those corridors where we can actually drive that change. And today, those pilots have proven that e-trucks can pay back in under 5 years. I don't think many of us would have thought a couple of years ago that that was possible. But if we design our interventions smartly, if we work together smartly, an e-truck can have a business case which revolves in 5 years. And that success is snowballing. In 2023 alone, in India, 16 major companies signaled demand for 8,000 e-bus trucks by 2030. So that's tomorrow, right, in terms of investments. And the EU, of course, has a similar idea with green corridors. And I think it's these kind of smart solutions that work that we need to come together around and see if we can give that a push to snowball change. And these real-world testing grounds for low-emission shipping and logistics have the opportunity to become a scalable blueprint. If we are to meet our Paris agreements and EU climate goals, and let's hope for a very ambitious NDC and an ambitious 2040 target, hopefully the Commission will come forward with those soon, we have to chart also clear implementation pathways. Again, this was the call this morning. Let's make sure that we create implementation pathways, not just ambitious goals. And that means phasing out fossil fuel vehicles, right? We have to phase them out. Investing in public procurement of clean fleets. Electrifying where we can. It's often the most direct way to actually decarbonization. And integrating, of course, where we must. The EU has set a goal to reduce CO2 emissions of heavy-duty vehicles by 45% by 2030 and 90% by 2040. And the manufacturers have committed to these goals. So it means that they are investing. We have to make sure that the demand is also there. And cities and green corridors can make sure to bolster that demand and ensure that we create also those lead markets in Europe. On top of that, we have to see transport much more as a set of interconnected sectors, including rail and water transport. Because long-distance freight, rural connectivity, and certain industrial corridors will all require alternative low-carbon modes. Rail, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about it from my colleagues later on, is 3 to 5 times more fuel efficiency than road transport per ton kilometer, and only 1/3 of the CO2 emissions per ton kilometer of a truck. Inland water transport, very often overlooked, is even more efficient and emits significantly less per unit of cargo. And for certain goods, even pipelines can ensure zero-emission transport. But the catch is, of course, investment. In many countries, and I was responsible also for rail, so I'm afraid I've encountered some of those questions myself. Rail and river systems are neglected. It's fragmented. In Europe, the European railway system is incredibly fragmented. It's so hard to get actually that rail transport across. But we have to be able to solve that. As a European Union, we have to step up our efforts to integrate our markets. That is what will give us competitiveness, and the rail sector should absolutely be one of them. If we are serious about systemic shift, we must reinvest in multimodal logistics, ensuring rail, road, and river all work seamlessly together. Transport is a system. Let's start to treat it like that. The European Commission does say that, but I must say, I don't know if you've seen it, but so far I haven't seen yet that super compelling, convincing systemic approach that combines integrated planning together with smart data systems. AI can lead to enormous optimization of our transport systems, but also energy transport coordination. We are in certain ways so terribly inefficient in the way that we use the available renewable energy. We need to start connecting our energy strategy to our transport strategy much more for efficiency and scaling. And therefore, we need more policy coherence. We need to look at transport as a system, see how we can make that efficiency higher. And of course, public-private partnerships. There is no way we can get this done on our own. We all need the other side. Public-private partnerships will absolutely be key. Systemic rethinking means rethinking how we run things, making systems work better together, putting people, especially those that are maybe not always included, into the room. And yes, of course, it's hard, and yes, it takes time, but going alone takes much more time. Let me conclude with this. We know transformation is possible. About 130 years, the means of over 130 years, the means of mass transport, horses and carriages, were leading to an overflow of manure, leading to nuisance, hygiene, and health problems. 50 years ago, and in some countries around the world that's still the case, people are choking on exhaust fumes. Leaded petrol polluted the air and harmed public health. A decade ago, few believed that today we would see the levels of renewable energy that we are seeing now. It was actually when I started to be very active in climate policy in the Dutch parliament, and people said, well, it's never going to grow fast enough. And there's been one consistent element in all the International Energy Agency reports, is that they underestimated the speed of growth of renewable energy. Now electric vehicles account for almost 1/4 of new car registrations in the EU. And this transition has brought together allies that didn't work together before. Now we must do the same for a very urgent clean transport transformation. And yes, Europe should aim to lead. We are one of the biggest emitters. We have a responsibility, not just to climate, also to our own population. Because this, if we don't do this, it harms our own population. We should make this part of a world that's more healthy, more resilient, and more secure. We should aim to learn and lead and form unusual partnerships. As the world is moving to town, cities carry an ever greater responsibility to play along. Green spaces will be key in keeping cities cool and resilient, but they have to be carved out of existing city space. Therefore, decarbonization and rethinking transport go hand in hand with livable cities of the future. The technology is there. We all know that. It really is about creating the business case, and for that, we need to align partners. So my message to you, because each and every one of you is here to create change. As business leader, as a decision maker, as an innovator, is this. Let's accelerate electrification, But let's not stop there. Let's scale up rail and river and integrate them smartly. Let's transform freight, not just for climate emissions, but for opportunities and livelihoods. Let's align finance and policy to de-risk that future. Let's approach this as a system. And above all, let's do it together. Thank you very much.